thank you so much. As you did see, our elections are this evening, and their ballots are being counted right now. Best of luck to all of the nominees. There's about 2 of us, I guess. But just to go over a few things, I have a list of things that we've done in the past, like the assisted living facility in Carmel. A few of us went there, me, Roger, Holly, and Katie. We had a really good time. There's a good 40 or 50 people there, and they had a great time. I mean, they really had some good questions afterwards. In fact, one of the old fellows, he's older than me, he brought up a question when Roger had his big snake up there, and he said, is that the same kind that Alice Cooper used? And I was like, oh no. It's like reality, we're all getting old. Yeah, this guy was well into his 80s, but he's a rocker, I guess.
Who's Alice Cooper?
And we had a real good time at Greenwood Nature Center as well, just a day later. Katie was there, Kimberly was there, Roger, Holly, and myself. We had a great time. Somebody else might have showed up as well. We had a really good time. And I'd like to thank this newsletter, if you did get the newsletter. If you don't have one, we can distribute it to you. There's some back there on the table, a couple of newsletters from past months as well, and free stickers back there. But I'd like to thank Holly, Katie, Mary, and Kimberly for contributing to the newsletter. I always need that stuff coming to me as quick as I can to put this newsletter together. Also, Jonathan Rinshaw, you're going to be putting together a little piece for the newsletter called the Red Spotted Newbie, right?
Yeah.
You want to explain that?
Yeah.
I love that name.
Yeah, Red Spotted Newbie.
Yeah, it's going to be for new folks, right? The new
Right.
guys, and it's going to include what?
Just basically how to get started in field derby. What to do in the winter when you're waiting on animals to come back out, and then what to do when they are out.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Again, we're looking forward to that starting in January, so that's a nice addition to the monthly newsletter. Okay, our Christmas party is going to be December 21st at Eagle Creek Park at the
Earth Discovery Center.
Earth Discovery Center. Thank you. I was trying to call it. It's not the same one. Yeah, that's a really cool place, and I'm excited about that.
It'll be in the dry lab part, but we'll still have access to some of the other stuff. I can show folks some of the herbs and stuff that we got there. So.
That will be fun. We still need to. We're kind of in the planning stages and that. We'll send. I'm sorry.
Is it just yes?
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, we'll send out we won't have a newsletter for next month, but we will send out a little reminder with a few words in it here and there, and definitely a reminder of our party coming up. What else is going on? We have a treasurer's report. I can give you the treasurer's report unless you want to. I don't remember what it is. Okay. Okay, you gave us a treasurer's report at the board of directors meeting, and we have checking. We have about $6,900. Savings, $2,078, and we have a CD with $5,135 in it. So thank you for doing a great job, Renton, and our treasurer. I'm going to be ordering caps and shirts with our new logo on them, so we'll look forward to seeing those. I'm in the middle of going through that right now. It's not very easy because our logo's got a lot going on with it, and they want to cause problems. So, our new survey, our new field survey, we are going to go next year with iNaturalist, so just anybody can go and put in what they see, what they've observed, and how many, and what kind they were. So we'll be doing this next year, starting with iNaturalist. So, and just a couple more things here. I was at the TAC meeting, the Technical Advisory Committee meeting. A few of you were here, were there as well. That's for the DNR, amphibians and reptiles. And I was there as a guest. But one thing they voted to do was they voted listing for the slender glass lizard to be a special concern, to special concern status. So they've been looking at numbers of those, and they haven't found an awful lot of them. So that might be. They voted to list it, but it's not going to be considered unless the DNR lists it, right? That's how that works. So, and also the Kirtland snake right now is under federal review to be listed. So that's a beautiful little snake. You all know about the Kirtland snake, I'm sure, and that'll just give it more protection, of course. Now, a couple other dates we have. Let's see here. We have Beers for Herpers coming up. These are next year dates, of course. March 1st. Katie has scheduled that for us. So another Beers for Herpers, or Beers with Herpers. It's a lot of fun at Metazoa Brewing downtown Indianapolis. We'll be at the Indiana Wildlife Federation Conference. That's been set up for February 1 by Ethan. We'll be at Garfield Park with a live exhibit February 22nd. And we have the Academy of Science meeting with a booth March 22nd. And that's all I have right now. But I think you might have some something to report? for the elections?
Just that our elections, Jim, you are our president now.
Thank you, appreciate it.
It's been close,
I thought
but,
for sure, this guy was gonna get it. He deserves it. Next year, you got this. Ethan has done a killer job with this club and keeping us up to date with all kinds of things and getting us scheduled and getting things, just everything behind the scenes. He's done an awful lot, so appreciate it. I would give him a big hand. He is
March
good.
Madness.
I'm sorry.
March Madness, did you say that?
March Madness, I don't have that date. Do you remember the date for March Madness?
I don't.
Okay, at Goose Pond, I completely forgot about that one. But yeah, we have quite a few things coming up the first part of the year.
Is it the 8th? No, it wasn't the 8th, that was the other.
It's on the website. I do know.
Yeah, February. I think it's late February.
14th, 15th?
Is it? Okay, thank you. Yeah, but we'll be there at that event, which is really neat, March Madness at Goose Pond down in Linton, with a booth. And yeah, can't wait to do that. Hopefully it doesn't snow and ice again. Okay, if there are any other announcements, anybody have any
I just have a
announcements?
question.
Yes.
Actually related to the newsletter. Since you send it out by email as well, it's the same one, right?
Yes,
Can we just request only to get the email?
absolutely. Yeah.
I just feel like, I don't want people to have to fold and stamp, even if it's me, a newsletter if I'm just gonna read it anyway, so. I don't know, is there like a way to do that, or?
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah, you can request for email only, yeah, the e-newsletter.
Yeah, and if anybody doesn't receive the online newsletter, you can go to the website, and at the very bottom it says there's a box to sign up for it. Just put your email, and you'll get the newsletter.
Very cool. Anybody else? Yeah, Rick.
If there's any interest for, or no prior plans for a January 1st hike, we invite anybody to go to the Sergeant Road Nature Park,
Oh, yeah.
now that it's done.
Yeah, you did that last year. We probably will do a January hike. We did it last year. We've typically done it in past years, so very cool. Anyone else? Oh, Kate.
Just that we're still working on the Gaia Naturalist project, stay tuned for the details for that, but, I'll be getting more details as far as timeframes, some of the more specifics for the holiday party as we kind of get a little bit closer. But we'll want kind of a rough estimate of how many folks will be there, but it's not terribly important, we don't need to do like an RSVP or anything like that. And I will have to duck out at like 7:30, but it's not because I'm not enjoying your presentation, I promise, I just didn't want you to think I was walking out on you.
Cool. Okay, anyone else? All right, well, thank you. If you could please silence your phone with respect to our guest speaker, that would be great. I think I have her, yeah. Fantastic. Okay, our guest speaker this month is Jackson Schoettle. All right. Woo, okay, he's a current wildlife biologist working with the DNR right now. An adjunct lecturer at Franklin College. He's completed his bachelor's degree at Ball State University with a master's of science and University of Alabama in Huntsville. His research includes conservation, ecology of reptiles and amphibians. Of course, as a native Hoosier, he is passionate about conserving and promoting the beautiful herbs in our state. So if you please give Jackson Schoettle a very warm welcome.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks for being here. And so, yeah, like Jim said, my name is Jackson Schoettle, and I'm here to talk to you about primarily my master's research, the seasonal vulnerability of snakes to road traffic at Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge. So, fun thing, I actually did my research out of state in Alabama, so while I'm here in Indiana now, I'll actually be talking a little bit about some stuff that happened out of state. So, first off, Jim kind of hinted at it, a little bit about me, why I'm up here talking to you guys. I've liked reptiles since about as long as I could walk, or as early as I could walk, probably before that if you ask my mom. So I am an Indianapolis native. I graduated from Roncalli in 2016. From there, I went and got my master's in science, or I got my biology degree, bachelor's at Ball State in 2020. And then from there, I did kind of want to get out of the state for a little bit, at least kind of test the water, see what's going on out there. So I did a couple of jobs, undergrad, internships and everything. I got experience for that, and that ultimately led to me working as a summer technician with copperheads at the Red River Gorge, which I can talk to you about that another time. That was a really cool project. And then ultimately I did decide to go back to school for my master's, and I ended up going to school in Northern Alabama, the University of Alabama in Huntsville, specifically to study snake ecology in the Neil Miller Lab. So a little bit about me, why I'm here talking to you today. Obviously I have since moved back to Indiana and am now working within the state as well. So shifting focus to my project. Many of you probably already know about snakes, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background anyway. So snakes play an important mid-trophic role in the southeastern U.S. And real quick, a lot of what I say is going to be specified for the southeastern U.S., but most of what I say regarding snakes also applies here to the Midwest as well. We have most of the same species. There's not a whole lot of major differences there. So, however, snakes are often overlooked in regards to conservation concerns. They're often not what we would call a priority species when it comes to conservation funding and projects and research as well. And so snakes, though, while they are overlooked, we do know some stressors to their population and their ecology. This includes habitat loss, right? That affects a lot of our species, right? Habitat fragmentation, not having patches connected. Snakes are very slow movers, so this affects them a lot more than, say, like a bird, right? And then infectious diseases. There's something called snake fungal disease, which is really going through. There's a couple other ones I'm forgetting as well as persecution. Obviously, as many of you know, snakes are not the most popular animal in the world. A lot of people do not like them. As a lot of you probably have countless stories of people wanting to tell me about how they kill a snake in their backyard, right? So compared to a lot of other critters, people really don't like snakes and are less likely to tolerate them being near them as opposed to maybe some other animals, right? So getting into a little bit of my project's focus. We have documented that snakes use roads, both for traveling from one patch of habitat to another, and they also use them for thermoregulation. That's especially true on asphalt roads, right? They retain heat, especially into the night. Those snakes will come and sit on that. That puts them at risk for potential vehicle traffic, right? And so, like I mentioned, most of these studies are actually documented using paved roads. There's a clear bias in the literature. Most of the studies are using paved roads. There are a couple that use gravel. There's a really cool paper about Snake Road in Illinois, which is gravel. But outside of that does demonstrate a little bit of a knowledge gap, how snakes interact with non-gravel or non-asphalt roads. So, obviously, I mentioned my project didn't take place in Indiana, so I'll talk a little bit about the ecology here. Where I was in Alabama actually falls into the Tennessee River Valley, and so that's a really biologically diverse region. It's kind of, I really love this area. It's really neat. We have a lot of what we have in the Midwest, kind of bleeding into a lot of those southeastern species. So the Tennessee River Valley area is actually a really neat kind of area where a lot of different species kind of come together. So it's very biologically diverse, and I don't just mean with herps. I got really into birding when I was down there. It's a very diverse area for all sorts of taxa. So as I mentioned earlier, though, within this area, snakes are still understudied. They're understudied in general. They're definitely understudied in the southeast as well. And so we had, to the point where within this area, we had infrequent historical records. When I went back and looked at literature and everything, we couldn't find some definite documentation of certain species from 30, 40 years ago was the last instance I would find one. So very inconsistent, sporadic search effort within this region. And this, of course, isn't just due to snakes not being a conservation concern. Part of it's due to their ecology, right? We've all been out herping and not found anything, right? Especially when we're looking for reptiles. I can't tell you how many zeros I had in this project of just going out for hours and not finding anything. Snakes are what we call incredibly cryptic, right? A lot of them spend most of their time underground. A lot of them are near the water. They're in burrows. They're not super duper active. And then there's that seasonal aspect as well. I was in the southeast, but there is still seasonal activity where some species wouldn't be active during the colder months as well. So it also matters what time of year you go out and look as well. So all those things make snakes kind of factor into snakes being relatively understudied within this region. So zooming in a little bit further to my study area, I did my project on Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge. It's 35,000 acres. It's a huge refuge. If you haven't been, I definitely recommend going. It's about 30 minutes west of Huntsville, Alabama, which you can see right there. It goes up to a military installment called the Redstone Arsenal, and I actually highlighted, I did road surveys, and so that's primarily where my research took place. And so notice it comes right along, this is the Tennessee River, so right along a relatively big waterway here. And so this is a super cool area, lots of cool hiking, lots of cool nature stuff. If you're a bird nerd like me, they have sandhill cranes coming in every year. It's a very, very cool and important ecological area that I had no idea it existed until I went down there. So I think it's a nice little gem in the hole in the wall. Part of the reason it's so useful is because it's got that mosaic habitat pattern, right? We have different kinds of forests, we have different kinds of, there's farmland, there's agricultural stuff, there's undeveloped prairies, and so that mosaic habitat makes it really useful for a variety of different species. Not only does it provide different habitats for the specialist species, but a lot of those generalist species will tend to go in between those different habitat patches, right? A lot of animals use multiple different types of habitat throughout their lifespan. So I mentioned birds. That's the primary focus of the folks at Wheeler. It's a national wildlife refuge, so it's managed by the feds, right? Fish and Wildlife is primarily, most of their focus is on the waterfowl management, on the flyways, on managing the hunting that goes on within there as well. But one of the cool things is just because it's primarily managed for birds, when someone like me who's really interested in reptiles wants to come along and do a project, this area is really useful for a variety of other taxa as well. As we found, it's actually a really useful little area for the herps within this region. And part of the reason it's really useful for them is that this area is kind of like a tri-county, tri-city area, Huntsville, Madison, Decatur. So Huntsville's like the big city there, right? Those are just kind of the area. It's one of the fastest growing regions in the country. So there's a lot of military contract stuff there. They get a lot of engineers and everything who are moving there for a lot of those projects. Their population has absolutely exploded in the last 20 years, especially the last 40 to 50 years. And so what happens when you have more people come around, when you get that population increase, you're going to have a lot of that habitat fragmentation, right? A lot of that land use has shifted within the past generation from what it was. And so I'll go into a little bit more about that later. I mentioned it shares a boundary with Redstone Arsenal. That is a military installation. I was not allowed to go on it. They have had some studies done on it as well. But of course, with activity on there, that is a potential area that borders right up to the refuge that A, organisms, the populations are interconnected, and B, depending on what they're doing on the arsenal, it could be disturbing them, shifting them kind of over to where I'm working. With that growing population, the surrounding area has been developed for a lot of land use. One of the biggest ones in that area is a lot of subdivisions are going up right around the refuge. My advisor lived in one that was like 2 miles away, and he kind of got the idea for this project from him and his wife going around doing road surveys just at night because it was so close, and he would notice before they would get to the refuge a lot of snakes on the road, like dead on the road as those subdivisions were being put in. So very clearly these organisms are being disturbed by the increased human population. There's less covered, less usable land than there was, again, about 20 years ago. So that's kind of the area around the refuge. Once we get inside the refuge, I mentioned how it's primarily managed for waterfowl. There's actually the cranes right there. They're super pretty. Definitely really cool if you get a chance. I know we get them through here sometimes too if you go on the right time. So part of why this area was interesting for me in regards to roads is that Wheeler already has seasonal road closures that they do every year for waterfowl. So they have waterfowl that'll come and they'll flood some of the floodplain areas to allow the waterfowl to do their thing and eat and whatever, and they'll block the roads off so of course the people aren't there, they aren't disturbing them. You can still hike on those trails and go view them. They even allow hunting, but they try to limit the road disturbance for the birds. So that's kind of why we had an idea of, well, maybe this could be helpful for non-avian fauna as well. So again, there's been very few studies. There's been like 1 or 2 small studies done on herpetofauna in the area or within the refuge. They were pretty excited for me to come along, mainly just because they didn't really know what was out there and they didn't really have the manpower to do it. So they were pretty excited to have someone interested in something other than birds. And like I mentioned, it's a national wildlife refuge. If you've been to Muscatatuck, or there's 2 others I'm forgetting them right now. If you've been to the ones in Indiana or anywhere else, you would notice that they allow things like hunting, fishing, biking, wildlife viewing, etc. And this particular refuge, fishing was a huge thing. There were lots of folks who would fish on the Tennessee River, lots of little like divots where people would pull out and be posted up fishing. Lots and lots of biking as well. There'd be a lot of bikers because they're a pretty extensive road. It's a really scenic route, and so you would have people come in, get their bikes, and be biking, especially on the weekends. It would get quite a few people. And so Wheeler, it gets over 100,000 visitors each year. So it's a pretty popular area within the region. So, what are my aims for this project? I just threw a lot of info at you. What was I trying to do? Well, I mentioned the historical records were really sporadic. We have an idea of what's out there, right? But we didn't really know for sure. So it would be kind of nice to give an update, especially since when a lot of those previous studies were done, that was before a lot of those folks moved, and we had a lot of that population increase, right? I want to investigate the risk of snakes using gravel roads within the study. So we've looked at how paved roads affect snakes. They do tend to use them. They are influenced by them. So I wanted to add that layer of seeing how they interact with gravel roads. Specifically, the entirety of the wildlife refuge has gravel roads in it. Probably should have mentioned that. There's paved roads around the refuge. On the property, it's all gravel roads. So it gave us a really interesting, unique window into it, where they have a different kind of road than the surrounding area. And of course, the Wheeler folks, they were kind enough to let us do our research here, so we wanted to potentially give them some management recommendations to take into consideration as well. So those were kind of the aims of my project, outside of course, getting my master's, right? So I broke this down into 4 study sites. So the Tennessee River actually bisects the refuge. So we have this northern side and we have the southern side here. If you notice, all the green, all the road areas that I have highlighted are on the northern side. That's because I am one person and I only had so much time and manpower I could do. So we decided to do quality over quantity. So I was able to do more replication with these sites, as opposed to if I did both the north and the south, I would have been able to hit each site less, which, as you know, with cryptic animals, you want to be able to hit the site as many times as you possibly can. So that's one of my little follow-ups in the discussion. If someone wants to attack the southern side of the refuge, we're pretty sure that there's more copperheads and some other species I didn't find a lot. So if you're interested in a master's, I can hook you up with my advisor. And so yeah, I only did research on the northern side of the refuge, which was still, this is a very large refuge. This is still pretty big. I will say the northern side is also more popular with the public. It has a lot more hunting, fishing, biking, public activity. It's the more scenic side, and so since that was such a big part of my project, that's another reason why we chose the north side as opposed to the south. And so we had 4 primary field stations. So these areas are not all like connected. They're kind of broken up across each other, at least as far as how I could access them via the road. And so I broke this up into 4 different areas highlighted there: Blackwell, Rock House, Penny Bottoms, Arrowhead, and Beaver Dam. I'll talk to you a little bit about kind of the ins and outs, the unique parts about each of these 4. So with Arrowhead Landing here, so I included both a close up of this is my the green is my road route. The triangle is where I installed a traffic logger, so I was interested in measuring the amount of people in and out on a day to see if there's 100 people going in and out of the refuge on a day, would that influence wildlife as opposed to if 3 people, right? I also did some visual encounter survey points, which I'll talk about that a little bit later. So there were 2 kind of sampling proponents of my project. I did both road sampling and then kind of point sampling as well, more traditional to kind of supplement that. So Arrowhead Landing. This area is a mix of agriculture and hardwood forest. So this is the same site. So you can see here there's kind of some tall grass that bleeds into some forest there. And then we had some agriculture that was actively managed up at the northern part of the site. So it's a nice little blending of habitat there. It runs directly along the Tennessee River, which is important. That's a very large river, like I mentioned. And the bottom section is permanently closed to vehicle traffic. So right here, that's as far as I could go with my car. I had to hike all of that myself. So it gave us a nice idea of part of the area consistently had road traffic, part of the area consistently didn't. So that was pretty unique about this place. And to give you an idea, it's 17 miles long to do that entire route. And so the days where I had to walk all of that were very, very long, I will say. And so this is really popular for boating, biking, fishing, a lot of that. A lot of runners like this area as well. They like to run along the river. My second station is called Beaver Dam Peninsula, so it's obviously gets its name. It's surrounded by water on all those sides. This is my smallest site of the three. It's actually my least favorite too. It's near an area we call Limestone Bay. This is primarily ag fields. That's why it was my least favorite. It was probably the least useful habitat to herpetofauna. All right, was the highest proportion of least useful habitat. This one's interesting though because they do close the entirety of the loop for waterfowl from mid-October to mid-February, and so they already had that seasonal road closure for the entirety of it. The road traffic counter, or the road was closed like right there, and so part of the year I was able to drive this loop. The other part I had to go and walk it. And it's only 3 miles long. So this one was very teeny tiny compared to the other one. Here is my largest of my sites. This is Blackwell Swamp, and it also bleeds into Rockhouse Road. So you can see this is a very, very large, this is my largest of my 4 stations that I had here. And so the swamp part on my left or right, is heavily vegetated, right? It's a very large swamp there. There's actually alligators there, it's really cool. Lots of different stagnant water, lots of those bald cypress trees, whereas this Rockhouse area is a lot more of your typical forests. There's a large pond in the middle too that they actually shift the water levels with, and it floods, and it's really useful for waterfowl in the winter months. So that's like right in there. So it's got kind of 2 areas. We got this swamp, and then we have this more typical hardwood forest with our pond in the center there. So this gave us 2 really cool, unique areas, and I only had to go to one place for the day to sample them, which was really, really neat. This one, fishing, biking was really popular. This one was really common. We would see horseback riders a lot. A lot of people would bring their horses here and do that. And so this section, the Rockhouse Road part, is closed to vehicle traffic, again, mid-October to mid-February. One thing I want y'all to notice, a lot of these closures are from like kind of the fall until early winter. Obviously, they're not being done for snakes, right? They're not really super active during that time of the year. Obviously, that's when a lot of those winter migrations are happening. So that's, if you're wondering, why are they doing those road closures then? That's actually the reason why. You have a lot of those birds flying north and south from the winter, and so they want to make sure that they have that safe flyover spot. This is about 22, 23 miles long. This was definitely my largest site, so it would take me a good chunk of the day just to even drive through it, let alone if I was going out and physically sampling or, actually finding stuff, right? And then my 4th and final station is what we call Penny Bottoms. And so this is a lot of wetlands and it's hardwood forest, but then there's an ag field in the center. So this one really nails that mosaic habitat. I really liked this one. It's closed to vehicle traffic from mid-October to mid-February, but this one also has kind of a summer closure, June through September. So this was really useful for me to get a feel for how a lack of road traffic affected snakes, because June through September, that is one of their areas of high reptile activity, right? So this was cool. Then I got this site was cool because I got to see what it's like when the road was closed during during their peak activity period, as opposed to being in the winter when we know most of them are in their little hidey holes, right? And this one's just a little bit bigger than Beaver Dam. It's about 4 miles, 5 miles long. So I have less than 100 miles total of roads that I surveyed. I really wanted to be able to hit those loops a lot, and really wanted to be able to sample them as many times as I could. So I conducted 157 surveys across all 4 of these stations, so 157 total. It's not like I was able to do all these 157 times. I did my best. So, and we followed seasonal activity patterns. So like I mentioned, right, snakes are not active year-round, right? They're not going to be super active in the winter, colder months. So unless it was an abnormally warm day, we weren't going to waste our effort. We weren't going to waste my time going and doing that. I had classes to teach then anyway. And so during the summer months, we would be really hitting hard going. I was going about 6-7 days a week when I could. And of course, we started not just in the summer, in kind of the early spring, because we really wanted to be able to pick up as they're coming out of their winter hibernacula and they're dispersing out. And of course, we carried it into the fall too, until we started to see that drop off of activity as they're going back to their hibernacula. So we did it differently, or we had followed seasonal activity patterns, which that kind of makes sense. It wouldn't make sense if we did like 4 surveys of each month. December would have been very unproductive if we did that. And so when I was doing these surveys, I was driving around the refuge. I was driving really, really slowly. So I was typically trying to go about 10 to 15 miles an hour if I could. I wanted to be able to stop and see and be able to slow down and make sure if there was something there. I would also search along the road margin, so it didn't have to be fully out in the middle of the road. If it was peeking its little head out off to the side, or it was starting to come out to the road, or even if I could see it from 2 or 3 feet off the road, we went ahead and counted that as an observation because it was near that road, right? And if it was alive, we noted its behavior and the direction of travel. So if it was crossing the road, we did note it. If he was just kind of basking on the side, we would note that as well. So we did take note of the behavioral characteristics of the animal as well. And easier said than done, we would capture it if possible. Remember, I was a one-man crew, so when a racer's on the road, they got the better of me more times than they didn't. Now, rat snakes and ribbon snakes and garters, my catch rate was a lot more respectable on those. So those were my road surveys. That was how I wanted to see how snakes were interacting with the roads, if they were using them, and if they were experiencing mortality at high rates, right? But I also mentioned how we were interested in kind of filling out the historical knowledge gaps of the area. So we also did visual encounter surveys as well to kind of supplement point surveys, right? So I randomly generated 47 sites across the 4 stations. So that's what all those little kind of yellow-orange dots are. So I put this all into R and put the coordinates on a grid, generated a bunch of numbers, filtered them out to the ones that were that fell onto the refuge that I could reasonably access. And so these were the 47 sites that I just did a visual encounter survey for. So I got out of my car, I stopped and I searched the surrounding area. I got off the road for these. Now, we did filter them though. We were ultimately trying to see which snakes were interacting with roads or had the potential to at least. And so we did filter them to be more or less within 250, 300 meters of a road. So I wasn't trekking way deep into the middle of the woods, but we were searching kind of that surrounding patch habitat off of the road. And we visited all 47 of these sites 6 times over the course of a year, or 13 months really, right? May 2022 to May 2023. So 13 months, I was able to get basically a full year surveying in, and so I did 157 road surveys across these 4 sites, and then and then I visited all 47 of these points 6 times. So when we stopped and did these visual encounter surveys, we would search about 150 meter radius around my point. So a sizable area, right? But we weren't going super duper far. You can actually see my lab mate right there. He's about 150 meters away when we took that picture. So we wanted to search a sizable area, and we did scale it to a total of 1 person hour work. So if I was by myself, I was out there for an hour. If I had my buddy with me there, we'd be out there 30 minutes, just to kind of scale it to make sure we weren't oversampling an area when I happened to have help with me. And so same thing as the road, we documented the snakes and we took measurements when possible. So very similar to the road survey, we just wanted to supplement to see if there were any snakes that were just kind of hanging out off of the road in the habitat patch that we would have missed by just traversing the road. So, when I was lucky enough to actually get my hands on a snake, which, by the way, I decided not to mess with vipers. We noted that they were there, but it just wasn't worth the trouble to get weight measurements, considering it wasn't like a huge focus on my project. So, we did find some moccasins and then 1 copperhead, but we would only attempt to capture non-venomous snakes. I was typically by myself. If I had someone with me most of the time, I would have maybe preferred that, but I'm not about to get bit in a wildlife refuge with no suspect. So when we did find a snake, we would ID it to the species level. So that was the first thing we did, like whether or not we saw a snake, right? Tell what species it is. We had ID'd its life stage, its activity and movement. So this was true, I mentioned this already for the road surveys, right? We wanted to know if they were traveling on the road, if they were basking. We also did this for the We also did this for the VES surveys too, right? We wanted to know, okay, was it basking on a log? Was it, if it was a water snake, was it swimming? Was it sitting there? Was it foraging, right? We would mark all of those different behaviors. And of course, we had to mark it with a GPS point and see where we found it. So those are things we did for every snake, including the venomous ones. For non-venomous snakes, we did try to capture them, and so we caught them in our handy-dandy snake bag, and we took its mass using that hanging thermometer there. One thing that I am very into as I get further into this field, I try to minimize the amount of stress on the animal as much as possible. I think that's something that a lot of good researchers do, but it seems to be a little bit more thought of, like people consider it a little bit more with like mammals and birds and stuff, so I've been trying to really promote that with herp research too. So one thing that I was really proud that we were able to do was I did not have to measure the snake manually, which as you all know, A, if you get them in a tube, that can be annoying and take forever, and the snake doesn't always like to be forced into a tube, and B, if you're manually doing it, you can risk hurting the snake. And so what I was able to do here, if you notice these pictures, I have a little pencil. Those pencils happen to be right at 6 inches, and so it's a nice reference point for all of my pictures. And so I would take a picture with the pencil point in reference, I uploaded it into a software processing called ImageJ, and it allowed me to set that pencil as my scale, and it gave me a good estimate of the snake's overall total length, and I also estimated snout bend length from this, all without having to physically restrain the snake. And the, the amount of air possible from this is not that different than obviously a snake restricting your movement. And again, I was by myself a lot, so it was a lot easier for me to just take a picture of a snake than trying to get it all straightened out. So that was something, it's been used before, we didn't invent it, but it's not something I've seen in a ton of the literature, and it's something I think that would be pretty cool to start promoting as a more often. And then we released them at the point of capture. So those snakes, at most, they were restrained about 15, 20 minutes. Most of them, it was probably 5 to 10 minutes if they would cooperate and get in the bag, right? So, easier said than done, right? So, again, I really wanted to minimize my stress on the animal as much as possible. I wanted to come in, take its measurements, let it go, without hopefully interrupting its day too bad. It got a weird little UFO encounter, I suppose, so. And so that was what I did when I, as far as the individual animal data. Those were all the data points that we were interested in with them. Of course, we were also interested in our environmental variables as well. And so at the start of each survey, I took several environmental variables. So I just decided to standardize it and just took them all at the start of each survey. We took, a lot of these you're going to be pretty familiar with. They're pretty standard environmental variables. We're interested in anything that might influence snake activity, influence whether or not it's out, active, or whatever. So air temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, the soil pH and temperature as well, right? All pretty standard environmental variables. We also noted the sky cover, if it was cloudy, overcast, sunny, partially cloudy, etc., and then as well as the precipitation. So again, just trying to get an idea of what kind of days the snakes were most active on, right? Pretty standard environmental science stuff here. I mentioned that we installed traffic counters. We were only able to do it at 3 of the sites. Beaver Dam, or what was it, Beaver Dam? Yeah. Beaver Dam I was not able to install them, or no, it was Penny Bottoms. Wasn't able to install it at Penny Bottoms. Yeah, so there's that. So we installed traffic counters at 4 locations across 3 of the sites. We had to install 2 here because this is the only one where there's 2 exit points. So we had to make sure that we got people who exited out of each area. And so that gave us an idea, right, for the amount of people going in and out of the park. So what I did, we got these data after we were done doing our surveying, and I went in and I took the total number of cars the traffic counters recorded at each of these 3 sites, and I divided it by 2, right? Because car goes in, car goes out. So it gives us a reasonable estimate on the amount of cars or the amount of traffic. And from then, right, it's hard to get an idea of the exact number of people, but given cars, you can at least tell if the refuge was busy that day, if there were a lot of fishers, right? We almost exclusively had higher numbers on the weekends. Should make sense, right? A lot of people were going fishing, doing stuff on their rec time. And then we use land cover data using ArcGIS Pro. We use the National Land Cover Database. We were only able to do that for the VES points. With the road, it would have all just kind of been road. So that was mainly for us using our VES, our visual encounter surveys, to see what kinds of different habitats we were surveying, since they were randomly generated. The two main environmental variables that from the National Land Cover data that were dominant within this shouldn't be too surprising. It's deciduous forest and water, right? We're at a wildlife refuge. There's a lot of swamps, a lot of open water. It's right near the Tennessee River, and so that combined with the forested nature of Blackwell Swamp and Arrowhead, those were very much our two most common land cover data points. So I'm just gonna brush up on the stats. I'm not gonna get too far into the weeds on it because no one really wants to do that. But I will tell you the general idea of what we were doing and what I was analyzing. So we used something called unmarked, which is we used in R, and so we generated a series of what we call occupancy models doing this. And so occupancy models are really cool. They generate a probability that A, is that snake occupying that area that you surveyed, and B, given that it is occupying that area, what's the probability that you'll actually go and detect it, right? And so this is really useful with cryptic taxa like snakes, right? Like I mentioned earlier, we've all been herping and gotten nothing, goose egg, right? That doesn't mean there aren't snakes or frogs or amphibians there, right? Just means we didn't find them that day. So occupancy modeling is really useful for cryptic taxa like that. It's not super useful with taxa like birds, right? Where you can go and hear them and establish presence. So it's for animals that it's really hard to actually find them and detect them. This is actually used in a lot of really cryptic mammal studies as well. And so it includes those environmental variables I just noted to y'all as covariates. So it factors in the environmental variables into the model. So we ultimately decided which covariates we wanted to include to kind of narrow it down. And so we ended up including wind speed, air temperature, traffic, deciduous, like in proximity to both deciduous forest and water. So those were our 5 variables that we ended up finding were the most influential as far as when we found snakes, and so we included those ones into our model. If you include everything into your model, obviously it limits your ability to make greater claims using it. So we kind of had to narrow down what were our most important factors we wanted to include. And so, like I mentioned, it gives you both an estimate for occupancy and detection. We were primarily interested in detection because at the end of the day, odds are snakes are in that area. So a lot of our occupancy values were very close to 1. They're like 98, 99, excuse me. As opposed to our detection values were often a lot lower. So I did kind of skip those through. There are a lot of dense looking graphs, and so I didn't include those in there. If you're really interested in them, I can show you to sometime after. But they are pretty, they're not the most entertaining graphs, I will say. So we ran these models for all the species pulled together and 5 commonly encountered species. So we filtered out the 5 we kind of found the most, and we ran individual species models for those. And we also included all our species just as one, just kind of snakes model. So getting into the results, like I said, I did 150 road surveys over 13 months. We only got 91 snakes representing 9 species. I had the most abnormally low field season possible. My advisor was shocked. There was another student doing a turtle project, and she kept doing it after me, and they found 2 or 3 species I never found in the 13 months, just not even looking for snakes, just doing box turtle research. So make with that what you will. I think I just had bad luck. I guess it's good for the snakes though, because less than 10% were dead on road. We were shocked by the lack of dead on road snakes that we found. It was a lot lower than what was expected. And so here's a breakdown of our road results. So notice we get cottonmouths are the one species around here we're not really going to have. Racers, king snakes. We do get our plain-bellied water snakes are more common than our northern ones down there. That's one kind of little flip-flop. Up here we have our northerns. We have our rat snakes. We found one decayed brown snake on the road. It was very dead. We had the ribbon snake, and we only found one garter snake, which was interesting. We found a lot more ribbon snakes than garter snakes on the road. So there's my breakdown of, again, 91 total snakes found on the road over my, again, 157 surveys, and only 9 of them were dead, like about 10%, a little bit less, right? So, again, way less dead individuals than we thought. And honestly, we found less overall individuals on the road than was expected to. Comparing that with our visual encounter. So one thing I want to notice is visual encounter, we did get more species than the road. That should make some sense though. Worm snakes, if anyone knows about them, they're almost exclusively fossorial, right? I found 1 or 2 of them like right after it rained, and they happen to be out near the surface. They're obviously not going to be something that's going to be out using and crossing roads very much, and even if they are, it'd be really hard to see them even when driving very slow, right? Worm snakes don't get very long. Let's see, we had our green snake, again, very dead. But overall, a lot of the same species kind of overlapped here. It's a lot of similarities. So what it does show us is a lot of the species that we were able to find on the area are at least using the roads in some form or fashion. And so remember, for these VES, I did 6 rounds of 47 points total over that 13-month period as well. And so another thing, racers and water snakes were definitely our most common. Water snakes, a lot of my area was swampy habitat. It was near open water, so that really shouldn't come as much of a surprise that this habitat's the most numerous species tends to be water snakes, especially those plain-bellied. And so that brings us to a total of 282 sites sampled. And so I got 12 species here. So I got a few more species. They were pretty small. Like I said, I only got 1 copperhead here. They're known to be rare on this part of the refuge, so I'm not really shocked I didn't find one on the road. And so 121 snakes over 12 species, we did get more of those individuals. So those are the snakes I found. And those are kind of my overall results. So getting to kind of my discussion, I wanted to tie this back to the seasonal trends that snakes and really all herpetofauna use. So as a lot of you know, snakes exhibit bimodal trends in their activity. In the southeast, it's typically around May and September. They have a huge peak as they all come out of their winter hibernacula and they disperse out and go where they need to go and do snake things. And then in September, as it starts to get a little chilly and people start to wear more sleeves, they start to sense it too, and they start to go back. That peak is usually not quite as big because over the summer, right, some of them have died, some of them have been eaten, some of them have been hit by cars, etc. So you do see 2 peaks. The spring is typically your big one, and your fall is typically another one. And that indicates they're moving as they go out. During the summer, a lot of times they're staying within a habitat patch area. So they might be moving, but it's not as much as maybe that dispersal time. That's what I detected, and that aligns with, I think, every paper I read. That's a very well documented phenomenon within snakes especially. So I will say my stats were not strong enough for me to like conclude anything like super duper like cool, but it was cool to see that at the very least my data did align with some of the previously done studies. Made me feel like I at least did something right. So like I said, this represents their movement to and from their hibernacula. And so, notice here, this is an outlier, ignore that. As November, we did like 2 surveys there and found like 2 snakes, so that's like really high. Notice though, over here though, we have that peak again here in around May and June, and then another peak here in the spring as well. And then there's a peak, another little peak there in September. So again, not super duper strong because I had a low sample size, but we do still see those general trends being shown here. My VES encounter, I think, shows it a little bit better. So that was my road surveys. This is my visual encounter. And so again, you see that peak there in that late spring, early summer. They're coming out of their hibernacula. You see another little peak right around there a few months later. And then cold months, cold months, cold months, and you start to see it pick up around March to May. And of course, different species have different levels of activity, right? King snakes have a smaller period, or they're active a little bit earlier, we found in this part of the region, as opposed to like garter snakes we could still find in like November. So there are some species-specific differences that would be interesting to dive further in on as well. So I mentioned my low roadkill numbers, right? 9 total dead on road over 13 months of searching, and again 157 surveys. That was incredibly low, a lot lower than I expected. So we still did get, again, lower than expected, but not like insanely lower. So we still did get a lot of live encounters, and so that tells us that snakes are using the roads, but either they're not being killed on them as much as we thought, or I didn't detect them at the rate that they're actually dying on the road. So are they at less risk because it's a gravel road as compared to asphalt, or was it just I was one guy driving around a whole refuge, relatively limited, right? If I started at one area at, let's say, 8, 9 a.m., I wouldn't always be getting done with that area until noon, 1 o'clock. If a snake was killed that night, that's a pretty long window for a lucky raccoon or something to come pick up that carcass, right? So that's one thing we were not able to fully, we weren't able to fully determine, so that's something some follow-up research would be really interesting to see, because we did not get enough of the numbers to really be able to determine this. Some more sampling would definitely be helpful. So on top of that, I noticed some differences in the gravel road versus the paved road. First off, the gravel road within the refuge, anyone who's been to a natural area probably knows, the roads are narrower, right? They're really more like 1.5 lanes as opposed to a full 2. So that's less of a risk that those snakes, if they're crossing the road, that's less time it takes as opposed to asphalt. Paved roads, while I will not say that the speed limit was followed on the refuge from the drivers I saw. It is lower and it has a lot of winding turns in the gravel road. You can't be going like 60 in the refuge. So while it was a 15-mile-per-hour speed limit and people were still going 35, that is slower than the surrounding roads, the surrounding asphalt roads around the refuge. Is gravel less dangerous? Again, we don't know. This is just something kind of building off that I started to notice. One thing that I've actually found some literature on since defending and doing all this stuff, there's some thought that gravel road's less dangerous as well because it provides more traction for snakes. So they can grip onto it better and move across it easier, especially after it rains on asphalt. It might be hard for some of those snakes to actually move across, whereas the gravel road, they have more traction, they can more efficiently move across. So that's something, I didn't get to talk about that, I didn't know about at the time, but that's a little add-on that I've since come across. And again, I mentioned a high scavenging rate. Keep in mind, we are not in the public, we're in a national wildlife refuge. Not only were there a lot of birds and a lot of snakes, I saw a ton of raccoons. There's a ton of Virginia possums. There were a bunch of birds of prey, a bunch of owl, tons of vultures too, especially. Those would probably be the biggest culprit, right? There's a ton, but we had a sizable population of black-eyed turkey vultures down there. So I think that a high scavenging rate, personally, I need more data to really say that, but considering I was just one person and that refuge has a lot of wildlife there, I think that within a day, most of those carcasses are probably getting picked up by something. So you really have to be out there going multiple times a day if you really want to be detecting things here. And so I mentioned, right, I was one person. I was really able to visit the same site back-to-back days in a row. I had 4 of those sites. I would go visit one. The next day I'd be visiting 2 of the other ones. And so at best, it would be 2 to 3 days between me going to each of those sites. That's a long window, right, for potentially a car to hit a snake be sitting there dead, some lucky animal comes up, oh yeah, grabs it and goes, right? I never know anything better, right? I just think there's no snake. So that's one reason why I think I would lean more towards I probably undersampled as opposed to gravel roads are just super great for snakes. I do think they're better than asphalt, but I do think if we were able to include a more intense sampling effort and multiple years, I think that would help. So I do think we under-detected the true dead-on-road snakes. And our detections on the road were seasonal as well, which again goes with that existing literature. We would expect snakes to be crossing more as they're going out of their winter hibernacula, and as they're coming back in, our data supported those trends as well, which again, not exactly what we wanted as far as we're able to figure all this stuff out, but it was still cool to again kind of follow up those seasonal trends and add to that existing literature. So one thing I noticed was there were some species-specific differences amongst my roadkill. So ribbon snakes were 30% of the encounters. They were pretty high. versus racers and rat snakes were pretty low, even though we found them alive a lot more than we did ribbon snakes. And so, why is that? Again, we didn't have the means to fully test for this, but just kind of spitballing, kind of thinking about maybe what's going on. Ribbon snakes are easily the smallest of these three species, right? They're really small, they're really quick. I think that not only does it take them, it's more effort for them to cross a road, people probably don't see them as well. And I know I said snakes are persecuted. I think a lot of the ones that were hit on the road were just people driving and speeding and they just don't see them. I just think that that's more likely. I'm sure some people do go out of their way, but especially with like little ribbon snakes, I think people are just driving over the speed limit and don't see them. Racers are really small, or racers had a really low percentage, and rat snakes were kind of in the middle. And so kind of breaking down the ecology, comparing these three. So ribbon snakes are small and they're active. Racers are large and they're really, really active. If anyone's come across a racer, right, they're out there, right? That was the case with the roads especially. I would get within about 20 feet, out. I didn't even need to really see the snake that much. I could just tell on its behavior if it was a racer or a rat snake. Rat snakes, they're actually, they can get a little bit bigger than racers, right? They're the biggest snake we have in that area. They're the biggest snake we have here. Rat snakes are large, so they can cross the road easier than ribbon snakes. But when rat snakes feel a car coming, or they feel a disturbance, they don't bolt. They freeze, right? And make you think they're a twig. Well, it's pretty ineffective if you're a car, right? So I think that they're able to cross the road more efficiently and easier than the ribbon snakes, and that's why they have a lower rate there, but their ecology makes them at more of a risk as opposed to an animal like a racer, which is a lot more fleeting. They're going to exhibit what we call crypsis when under duress, whereas the racer's just going to get out of dodge. So, again, that'd be a great project to kind of see, to dive further into some of those species-specific differences. But those were just some general trends I noticed even with my low level of road encounters. And so, tying it all together, management recommendations. That was kind of the end goal of this, right? They primarily do waterfowl stuff here. I want to do this project to see if there's anything we could do that would be friendly for the reptiles while also still keeping this as a waterfowl haven, right? So, road closures. This one's easy because they already do them for the waterfowl. There's a study on Snake Road that I ended up citing in my paper that demonstrates how just closing it for about a month during those dispersal periods is super helpful for limiting the amount of road mortality. So it would be relatively minimal risk for the park to close it about 2 months out of the year, like mid-May to mid-June, and then about mid-September to like mid-October or so. Now keep in mind, up in Indiana, those times would be slightly different, right? I am dealing in a slightly warmer area. But just implementing some 3 to 1 month road closures does a lot to just allow those animals to disperse back to their hibernacula safely. And to be honest, I think that's better for the people, because a lot of people there don't want to be running into water moccasins. If we just give them a month to get back to their burrow, there's going to be less people stepping on them, coming across them, getting scared. So I actually think it would be beneficial for the people at Wheeler, or the public at Wheeler as well. And so we would do that those peak activity times. And again, I'm not saying we close down the whole park, just some of those high activity areas. I mentioned my sites Penny Bottoms and Blackwell. Those are my 2 most productive sites. I think those are the only 2 that really would benefit a lot from being closed. Those are also the areas that have the highest proportion of water moccasins. So again, kind of thinking about minimizing the amount of negative interactions the public has with the snakes as well. So those were some things. So those road closures, I ended up suggesting them. I don't know if they ever took it into consideration, but I do think just a few short road closures, and this, I can extrapolate this out from just Wheeler as well. I think a lot of natural areas, if they implemented seasonal road closures for a variety of fauna, it would really minimize the impact that roads have, because it's not just snakes. A lot of studies are showing that roads are very detrimental to species ecology, and a lot of species are really not dealing well with the increased fragmentation. All right, so kind of tying it together. What I wanted to do was update the historical records of the area. Well, I didn't get as many snakes as I wanted. I do feel like I did that. I pretty much established a lot of what we know is there. I found, I think, most of the usual suspects, the more common species there, right? So I do think we did that. We investigated the risk of snakes using gravel roads within the refuge. So again, I was limited to being within the refuge on the northern half, but I do think we investigated, I do think we did a good job of exploring that and seeing how they're interacting with both within a national wildlife refuge and using those gravel roads. And as I just said, I gave them some management recommendations about those road closures. So real quick, some future directions, just if anyone's interested for a master's or a PhD idea, I'll take it. So multiple field seasons, right? I was on a time crunch being on a GTA and everything, right? And I created this project from scratch. So if I had my way, I would have like a second or even a third field season on this. I just wasn't able to, I was limited. It would have been nice to have more researchers per trip, especially for the VES surveys. I feel like I'm pretty good at spotting snakes, but when there's one person too, it's just so hard sometimes. If you hear a rustle or everything, a lot of you know, right? Having an extra set of eyes, I do feel like, I didn't look into this super in depth, but I do feel like we tended to have more success, at the very least, catching the snakes when there were more than one of us there. So that would potentially also give us more of the, give them more of their health data, their weight, length measurements too. I wasn't able to factor those into my final analyses that much, just because I didn't have enough snakes, especially when broken down by individual species. One thing I do kind of regret that I didn't know more about was I would have liked to do more diverse sampling methods. I was primarily just doing regular, just what I could do. I would have loved to get permission to set like some minnow traps and things like that, because I definitely think I underrepresented some of the more aquatic species as well. And we had some cover boards in the area, but again, I think it would have been nice to set up cover boards in more areas than there were. One of the big issues with that was we were really worried about the public interacting with them, because there's a lot of people who just walk through the woods while they're hunting and stuff. And so if we set down cover boards, there's ultimately the risk of having them mess with that or do whatever. So that was one limitation, where if we could make a way around it, I think it would help establish some of those cryptic species there. I actually say that, if you notice, this is a mud snake. That was not what showed up in my project. We found this a month before I officially started surveying. My advisor and his wife were, again, in an area where I literally had a VES point, and they just found it, called us over to see it. I visited that point 6 more times throughout the year and found nothing. And so if you know anything about mud snakes, right, they're super duper cryptic. They spend a lot of time in the water, in the mud, in the burrows. I believe they eat a lot of crayfish. That's their primary food source. And so these guys only really come out after a really heavy rain, and if you happen to get the right moisture. So wow, I'm not overly shocked I didn't find one during my thesis. It's a little frustrating that like April of 2022 we found one, and then from May of 2022 to May 2023 I didn't find any of that. So yeah, so I definitely think we underestimated the species richness, even though I think we established what the most common species were. I think there's a few more of those kind of rarer species that are still out there that we didn't get. And so, just to show you a few of them, queen snakes are a big reason I would like to do some aquatic trapping. Our habitat was really good for them, but they just don't spend a lot of time on land. So I think that I do think they're there. Diamondback water snakes, my advisor again has found them on the property, just not during my official survey season. And we also he's found like 1 or 2, so we know they're really rare there. So we would have to establish a considerable search effort to find one. Corn snakes, we don't have a ton of habitat for them. With all the ag fields, though, I was surprised we didn't find one. Timbers and ringnecks, again, I am a little surprised, but they're more found in kind of the higher elevation areas surrounding the refuge. So the refuge doesn't have a ton of their like great habitat. Prairie king snake's another one they found when looking for turtles after I was done. That was really cool to have them find that in my project when I couldn't establish that. That's another one, I don't know why we didn't find them too much, because that was one my advisor would find dead on the road, like outside of the subdivision. So we think they're pretty common surrounding the refuge. I have no idea why I couldn't find one on there. So it's the way it goes sometimes, I suppose. And then hognoses, again, they're super cryptic, they're hard to find. I don't think we had enough dry soil for them anyway. These are all species, though, I wouldn't have been shocked if I found them. And a few of them, I think, very much are on the refuge. So again, a longer field season, more people, diverse array of sampling methods, I think would be really helpful to kind of shortening those gaps. All right, that's all I got. I want to thank, obviously, this is my master's research, so the folks at Wheeler were super helpful. They're really happy to let me come in and help. They're really nice about letting me use the property. They were really, really laid back, and they kind of let me just do whatever I wanted as long as I could justify it, which was cool. My advisor, Dr. Niemiller, then my committee members, Dr. Hopkins and Colliver, they helped me a lot. Dr. Kendall as well. Then of course my parents who are here supporting me as always. My sister, who would be if she wasn't in college, and then of course all my field herpers, all my various friends. One of them's here, and all my lab cohort as well. I had a lot of people come help me. I know I mentioned I was out doing it by myself a lot. That was not for a lack of effort from my friends and everything. They're all very busy in their own lives and stuff. So when they were out there, they were out helping me, and I definitely would not have caught as many snakes as I did without them. So, any questions?
You said that you didn't find that many animals in the fall you did in the spring. How about the babies from that season? Did you see any of those?
I did not find a lot of neonates. I did find more juveniles in the early summer, especially with like water snakes. I would find neonates, but as far as all those other species, I barely found any neonates. I didn't find any. I don't think I found any moccasins. I didn't. It was mainly just a couple of garters and what was it? I found a couple of rat snakes, but yeah, I was interested that I didn't find a ton of the babies. I found a lot of subadults, like ones that are maybe a couple years in, but I did not find a whole lot of the babies. Yeah.
Well, when you were collecting data on the live snakes, did you also collect data on the roadkills?
I didn't. I did not. I did. I collected the length in ImageJ. I didn't weigh them. Some of the ones I found were pretty decomposed. So if they were in good shape, I ended up collecting them because I was originally going to try to do one of my committee members, she does a lot of disease ecology, so I was going to try to send them in for that, but we ended up only getting like 3 or 4 usable carcasses, so we kind of had to, that would have been a really cool chapter to add on, but I just didn't get enough of the dead on road individuals. So, yeah.
Yeah, you didn't mention that you did any skill clipping or anything like that, so are there any possibilities of recaptures and re-sightings?
Yeah, so there is a possibility of recapture. My advisor was saying based on what we were looking for, since we were mainly interested in just if they were using the roads versus, and just seeing what species were there, that was not a priority for us, as opposed, because we were originally going to do scale clippings, but we decided that would have been too stressful given we were just trying to see more. We weren't really interested as much in are these the same individuals, more so are they using the road. So that would be something I think, there are a couple spots where I'm pretty confident it was the same individuals. Like there's one spot in specific where I would pretty reliably find 3 or 4 water snakes. It was like, and it was one of my VES areas where I walked out and, it was at the end of like a gully, it was still water and everything. So like, pretty confident those are recaptures. So I do think we got some, but again, when I looked into my overall data, I didn't have a whole lot of captures at the same sites. The same species at the same sites, not a lot of similar measurements matching up. So unless they were traveling pretty far, I don't know if I really got them that much, but that is, again, something to, if we would have done more than one field season, I think it would have been more worth our time. It would have been more feasible to go and do that kind of stuff, because we were originally going to try pit tagging, but funding was a little tight for pit tags. So that's one of those things. If it was a PhD, I think I would have added that on. Yeah.
A way that you can account for, maybe you did in your models, the difference between the stretches that you were walking versus the ones that you're driving, because you're not walking 15 miles an hour, your detection is going to be different.
No, yeah, we did not account for that. That was why we drove very slow. And I understand, like that definitely is a little bit of a difference there. So we did, to be honest, a lot of the walking areas, it was relatively few, so we didn't really think that was enough to factor in. And we were more interested, again, like more so, is the road itself what they're interacting with, as opposed to the overall species sorry, I lost my train of thought there. We didn't think that, we were potentially gonna include that, but again, I found so few dead on road species that we kinda had to like cut a lot of our would-be analysis of that short. And so we really just didn't have enough data to meaningfully say that between those two, so.
Connie, I had a question. I was really surprised you said there were alligators that far
Yeah.
north. Yeah, that surprised me.
Yeah, so I talked to my advisor about that. So I think it's a little bit of a combination of things. I think the population got started when people obviously released pet situation, because that is north of their historic range. But I mean, I pretty reliably, there were 2 or 3 areas where I reliably saw an alligator. Like I actually saw a mom with babies. She was in this little cove. I saw her probably 10 times throughout my surveys there. So what I think is happening, what my advisor thinks is, people release them as pets, they got started as a population. As the climate's increased in temperature, they've been able to stick around there when they previously haven't, and so it's now gonna kind of blend into because it's not that far from their natural range anyway, so they were just kind of missing the population starter, and so they are not super common down there, though. I will say they're pretty, it's not like if you go down to Louisiana or southern Alabama where they're everywhere. They were pretty rare, but I mean, there's an established population there. And it makes the Huntsville news too when everyone's in like a retention pond. It's still novel enough that they like freak out a little bit about it, so.
And also, sorry,
Yeah.
what was the name of the software you used to measure the snakes?
It's called Image J. Yeah, we actually, it was my advisor and his wife who was my teaching, she was my GTA boss. She was the one who suggested using that, because this was like pretty close to like COVID stuff, so we had a lot of online labs when I first started, and so we used it to actually do the surface area on leaves for my like freshman level bio class. And so you can very easily do length estimates too. So she actually brought up, because I mentioned I was pretty early on, I actually started trying to physically measure the snakes. When I was out there by myself, I was like, guys, anything smaller than a ribbon, or anything bigger than a ribbon, I'm struggling here. And so she mentioned, why don't you just do that? And it was actually, I mean, like I said, I think that was one of the cooler things that I was able to do, because it really did minimize. And Image J is free and accessible to everyone too. Part of the reason we used it was because we didn't have to charge my undergrads anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I never done studies on this, but just observations. When I used to hike a lot and go herping, true, the racers, from point A to point B, they're gone. But I noticed that on ribbon snakes, when they're crossing the road, especially if I disturb them, the seniors on that, instead of heading for the other side, they seem to go straight down the road.
Huh.
So I was wondering if they're kind of putting themselves in more dire straits there.
So I've never personally observed that. I would be really interested, because like if they're doing that, that would 100% put them at more of a risk if they're going, a way that's not effective. Because that's why I think racers were so, like you said, so effective, is because they don't even go across the road. They just immediately turn around and go back. So I was not able, I usually I tried to not get super close to them. If I could see a snake, I was hopping out as soon and then walking up to it. So I never got close enough to really see them like do any of that, but that would be potentially something, especially since they're small too, and would be seen less and everything. I could definitely see a behavioral ecology difference there.
Yeah, I noticed that because I was able to catch them then.
I wish they did that for me. I maybe would have got a few more on the road. Yeah.
This area, it kind of looked like a kind of a greater floodplain area. Did you see any literature that kind of, I guess, suggested that, and how, if anything, like a historic flood happens in this particular area, how that affects more of the terrestrial snake species?
I didn't see anything about historic floods. I do know, being in the river valley area, I mean, obviously the flooding, it's pretty rich soil, and this area, part of the reason it's also being fragmented is because it's really valuable farmland too, so a lot of those people. So I didn't see anything within the literature specifically about that, but I did notice that, like, I do think being in a floodplain, being in that area, definitely influences the species rich and the ecology. It makes it, for lack of a better, good habitat, right, for these critters.
Cool.
Any questions?
What kind of snake made you son?
That's racer. So that's what people like. My big thing is like I'm very skeptical of a lot of stories of people saying snakes chase them. I've spent probably more time out, I mean, this route maybe not, but in general, I've spent more time out in the woods bothering reptiles than the average person, and they never, ever, ever chase me. We actually got a great picture. This is on my birthday, actually. We had a racer in the middle of the road. I actually had, obviously, a partner with me this time, and so we're trying to get it in. I do feel bad for this animal. We probably tortured it, like, mentally. We were both on either side of the road. It looked, saw my car, looked, saw my buddy, looked, saw me, probably saw I'm a little bit smaller than my buddy, and was like, all right, I'll go. And so that is the only time I've really been aggressively, he was jumping and going at me, but in reality, what he's doing, if you look, what's right behind me? He's trying to get away. So, it's a great picture, it's funny, so my advisor says that's why you wear a cup when you go herping. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was the one bothering that racer. I deserved it.